Geeta Ratan International Business School. I am your host Malika Arora for this evening. I welcome all of you back to Rahat. For the ones who have joined us today for the first time, we started Rahat on 21st June with a yoga session with Sri Abodh Srivastav ji, where he demonstrated yoga exercises for children and for elders, which focused on breathing exercises and Surya Namaskars. Since the outbreak of the novel coronavirus, people have found it extremely difficult to differentiate between the symptoms of COVID 19 and that of the flu and common cold. Spotting the earliest signs of trouble would give you enough time to prepare, isolate, and save the ones around you. While a lot of COVID cases are still asymptomatic, there are a broad symptom which can determine whether or not you are at risk of COVID 19. I humbly request all the audience to keep their mics off and camera on all the time. In case you wish to ask anything in the middle of the session, you can write it in the chat box and same will be answered at the end. So without taking much time, I welcome our speaker for the day, Dr. Matthew Varghese. He is a graduate and a postgraduate from Maulana Azad Medical College, Delhi University. He was the head of the Department of Orthopedics, St. Stephen Hospital, Delhi. He has specialized in trauma care with particular emphasis on reconstructive surgery for trauma, paralytical poliomyelitis, cerebral palsy, and pediatric orthopedic problems. He is also an associate faculty at the Transportation Research and Injury Prevention Program, which is a WHO collaborating center at the Indian Institute of Technology. As an expert on injury control, pre-hospital care, and epidemiology of injuries, I feel honored to welcome you, sir. So please, the session is all yours now.
Thank you so much. At the outset, thank you very much for that warm introduction and a very generous description of what I do. But none of what you heard of what I do gives you a clue on why I'm involved with COVID. All that you heard had to do with orthopedic surgery, injuries, and things that are completely unrelated to the COVID disease. So I have been asked this question, sir, you're an orthopedic surgeon. How come you got involved into this? Very valid question. And therefore, I think before we start off, I'll give you a brief outline of how this whole thing came about, my involvement into this. And then that will give you an idea that in medicine, it is how you approach a patient. So we have to be like detectives when you're investigating a crime. And then find out evidences. Based on the evidence, find out the culprit. And based on that, decide what needs to be done now. It's Sherlock Holmes' job of grabbing all those little pieces of evidence, putting it all together, and coming to the big picture. The disease was first reported in Wuhan, in China. And when it was first reported, the report was a very small, brief note in the media. And I read it in one of the finest scientific journals in the world, which is Nature, which has one of the highest impact factors among all journals in the world. So this report said a new virus possibly seen in Wuhan, causing serious infection from the wet market of Wuhan. As soon as I read about a new virus, I was a little curious. I read whatever was there. And I look at this Nature journal every week. Next week, there were more details on the virus. The consequences caused by the virus. So I was a little more excited. The new virus, new disease, God knows what all it will bring in. And reading about the consequences that were happening in Wuhan, it was really scary. The fear of such a contagious disease put the frights in me. But if this disease comes to India, then we will be in serious trouble. So I thought, let's hope it doesn't come. I called up some friend of mine and the National Center for Disease Control and Prevention and asked her, supposing such a disease comes to India, are we prepared? I think so. We should be able to handle it. I said, do we have the kind of PPEs? Now everyone knows what is a PPE. Those days, very few people knew what is a PPE. So every person in our country would know what is a PPE. We have the PPEs in sufficient numbers. Forget about the patients, for the care workers. Yeah, we will have something. How many do you have? So I was surprised at the answer. We have around 50 in the center. 50. And now, looking back, what we went through in the last 1 year plus, just look at the number of PPs that were huge numbers. And this is what set me thinking that if we have only 50 PPUs in the national center, how many would we need? How will we generate the capacity? What will happen to patients? What will happen to our hospital? What will happen to healthcare workers? So I started reading more about the disease. The WHO declared a global pandemic on March 11, 2020. And India declared its first lockdown on 22nd of March 2020. 22nd of March. That's more than 1 year back. And with that announcement, everyone was closeted within their rooms and homes. Children were closeted. Children were denied the playground and the ability to interact with their other colleagues. And all over, there was panic. As initially there were hardly any cases worth mentioning, we did have some Italians getting affected in Rajasthan. We did have a few visitors from our Chinese nation coming to Kerala, having the infection, and similarly, a spattering of cases. The earliest case that I interacted with was a doctor, friend of mine, and I spoke to him. And when I spoke to him, I realized he was petrified. He was petrified of dying. He was petrified of infecting others. He was petrified of the disease. He was petrified of the unknown. I chatted with him. So next day I was worried for him. So I called him again. And this became a habit. I called him every day to find out how he's doing. And it was a daily conversation. He started looking forward to it, and I started looking forward to it so that we can talk to each other and exchange notes. I would tell him about things in the city while he's closeted within the room in the hospital. Those days, though he was a mild case, he was admitted. So admissions were done early on. And then more people started getting infected. And I started talking to them. I realized that what they told me was once they talk to somebody, it's a counseling that is going on. It's an interaction, a counseling interaction. I'm finding about them, asking them, do you need any help, and asking them about their family. So it's a kind of an interaction, which is like a counseling. And when a patient told me, doctor, the first time I'm sleeping in 2 weeks is now, I realized the importance of what I was doing. So therefore, anybody I learned was having the disease, I started calling them up on their cell phones morning and evening. And the number of cases increased. And as the number of cases increased, the list of patients that I have to call up on phone also increased. And as that increased, I realized I do not remember all the problems of all the patients that are on my list for phone call. So I started maintaining a diary. That became a habit. And every day I would note down about the patient that is new on my list and the patient that is got diagnosed and I am calling up to follow. So this became a pattern where I was telling the patient based on my diary recording. If you see this diary, those of you can see it, date by date, I'm following up the patient, which day, what symptom, what medicine, what is new happening, I kept noting down. And I kept talking to them and I kept noting down. By August, September, I had a sufficient number of cases and I saw a pattern evolving, which told me how the disease is evolving in a human being. So as they would talk to me, I would then tell them, do you have this? Oh, yes, I have this. Oh, do you have the symptom? Oh, I have this. And when I would talk to them, initially I would talk to them and say, when did you get infected? So I was told, oh, on such and such day. But soon I realized the number of days from the time of their exposure to the first symptom was almost always 5 days. So then I asked, countering them, when they tell me I had this symptom, this is the first day of my symptom, I asked them, did you go to a party on this day? Oh, how do you know, sir? So the day is calculated on the basis of the incubation period. And what is the incubation period? From the entry of the virus till the first symptom, the time in which the virus enters, becomes a part of your cell in your body, multiplies there, and comes to be in sufficient numbers to cause the disease. That is the first symptom day when symptoms start appearing. Whether it is fever, whether it is sore throat, whether it is itchy throat, whether it is a cough, whether it is loose motion, any of these things, or all of these. That tells you that this patient had this symptom on this day, but most likely was infected about 5 days. But this was in the September-October period. But in the surge, the virus was so contagious that nobody had a clue where they got the infection. In the previous episode, people were infected, one member per family, probably one member in a whole block of flats. But this period of surge in April, May, now it's finishing now. The numbers were huge. Everyone in the family, including the housemaid and the driver, everybody was infected. And no one had a clue where they got the infection from. No one had a clue. So they were all grouping in the dark. Sir, we didn't go out anywhere. I don't know where we got it from. In China, for example, they do a very serious investigation. If somebody is found positive, they investigate the whole flat. They have apartments, multi-story apartments. If you've been to China, they don't have bungalows like we have. They have multi-story apartments. So they have these exhaust vents. So they even investigate if the person was living opposite a vent facing a house from the exhaust. So from the exhaust, viruses can be transferred to the opposite house if the windows are open. That is the level of investigation they did. We don't do those. So we do not know from which house where the infection spread through the air to the next house. But there has been an infection. That's all that we know. So if we don't know where we got it from, and if we do not have the wherewithal to investigate, then we have only one knowledge point. So in any investigation, we start from where we know. So I was asked to speak about prevention. So prevention is the first thing in prevention. You have to know where you got it from. If you don't know, we don't know. So if you don't know, then we look at, do we know when the disease started? Okay. And what is the disease starting? The infection. The first symptom. After the incubation, the first symptom. And the first symptom may be patient will tell you it is fever or cough or something, because that's what troubled him most. But you have to probe further. Oh, did you have body ache before that? Oh, sir, one day before I had body ache. Oh, did you have some itchy throat? Yes, sir. I was started with a sore throat. Next day, I did some extra cleaning in the house. Some visitors were coming, and I had severe tiredness at the end of the day. So your first symptom is not the fever that you first told me, not even the tiredness that you faced after cleaning spree that you did, but the sore throat that you started off with. So these 2 days that you can make a mistake in calculation can make a difference between your being in the ICU on a ventilator or you being at home happily. Because the prevention of the dangerous turn in the disease is to be planned based on your first symptom. That is why you have to understand the first symptom and scrutinize it very carefully, confirm it very carefully that this is the first symptom. So you have to understand that. So I always ask, so when was your first symptom? Okay, I note it down. So my diary noting goes. And then what happened? Second day, usually there is fever. First day may be sore throat or stuffy nose or blocked nose or whatever. But the second day, usually they have the fever. It's a low grade fever. Occasionally it's 100 degrees measured. The third day also, they may have 99.5. And the problem that comes is most people start taking, sir, I have taken Dolo, or I have taken Calpol, or I have taken Crocin. Irrespective of the brand that you choose, if you've taken paracetamol, then that modifies your fever for the day. Because paracetamol can act for anywhere from 4 to 6 hours and suppress your fever. Therefore, if your disease is taking a dangerous turn, you will mask it by taking Calpol. So you shouldn't take Calpol at all? No, that's not what I'm saying. All that I'm saying is you take Calpol or paracetamol when you have the symptom coming of fever and the fever is more than 100.5 or 101. You don't have to treat low grade fevers. Treat only high grade fevers. And do not take paracetamol unnecessarily. Okay? Because we want to see, does the fever go to a high level on the 4th and the fifth day. Because those are the days most people, 80% for example, would become all right from the first phase of illness. So the virus produces only a mild cold-like symptom. Little blocked nose, little sore throat, little cough, little fever, little uneasiness, little tiredness, and that's it. It doesn't cause anything beyond that. And it settles in 2-3 days' time. And in 80% of cases, 85% of cases, this is the only thing that they have. They're absolutely fine after that. They have no other symptom. They're completely all right. 80 to 85%. And if you look back into the history of the evolution of the disease, in the early phases, some of the early cases were in aircraft carriers, cruise ships. So when the report of the Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier was heard, that is when people realized you may be completely asymptomatic, because 60% of the Marines, aircraft carriers have the army and the marine people. And the US Marines are some of the fittest people under the sun. So these people had zero symptoms. But when they were tested for the virus, they were positive for the virus. So though they were symptom free, they were tested positive for the virus. So this gave us a clue that 80% of people may have very mild symptom or no symptom, and they are fine after that. And if they are fine, they can infect others, but they themselves have no problem. They will recover from the illness. So when are they infective? So prevention of spread of infection from yourself to somebody else or from somebody else to you. And this is what you have to understand. So people think that they are infective only when they are tested positive. No. The testing positive, you saw the fiasco in terms of how many days it took people to wait for an appointment for testing. And then even after the sample was collected, how many days did it take for the person to be getting the report? So there were anywhere between 3 to 5 gaps at the peak of the epidemic of people testing positive, getting a positive report. So the logic that we use is, if you think you have fever, cough, or anything which looks similar to a corona infection, assume you have the corona infection and isolate yourself. Because when you have the first symptom, you are infective. One day before you are infective, one day later on also. So before your symptoms started, while you were in the asymptomatic phase, you were infective. So you need to protect your family members by, even with that little feeling of unwellness, you protect your family members by isolating yourself and segregating yourself from your family members. Because your infectivity is peak first day of symptom plus minus 1 day. Little less infectivity, but still infective, about 2 days plus and 2 days minus. So if your symptoms started on the 17th of June, then on 18th you were infective, on 19th you were less infective but still infective. On 16th you were infective, on 15th also you were infective. So those 4 days you are infective with peak infectivity within the 3 days of your peak symptom. So you need to protect your family members by isolating yourself. And what do you mean by isolation? And in isolation, what you need to do is isolate yourself into your room, not going out, not eating with your family members, segregating yourself into your room, somebody sleeping in the room, the food that you need to eat, the tea that you need to have, not talking to anybody without a mask, having the windows open, maybe having an exhaust fan there going out, but make sure that the exhaust fan doesn't go into a corridor where people are walking by. And wearing a mask as far as possible, and mask not in a loose way. Mask covering your nose, covering your mouth. Both are important. You have to make sure that both your nose, a lot of people come to me like this, useless. It has to be nose covered. Please don't touch your mask here. Because if you touch your mask here, you may have been in a hospital. I've got to know people who just took the patient to a hospital and got the infection. I always have this on when I'm interacting. I have my nose covered nicely, well fitting all around. That is your best prevention. Not loose fitting, not like this, not like a small, partially covered thing. No, it's all open. No, should be snug fitting, very well done. That's it if you're going to a hospital. But remember, any mask is better than no mask. Remember that. And you don't touch here. If you touch here, then there is only one solution. And that solution is getting this a sanitizer. I use a sanitizer, but remember you need to use it properly. Use it liberally, both ways. Liberally, whole thumb. See, my whole hand is shining wet. Can you see that? It has to be whole hand between the web spaces, completely done. That is the way to do it. So if I touch my mask, I touch it from the string, not from there. I touch it from inside, not from outside where viruses might be sticking, and put it away. And then sanitize your hands. I again see a lot of people carrying small bottles. No, it doesn't work. You don't have a small bottle like this. You need to have a liberally applied sanitizer on your whole hand between your web spaces all over. And then isolate yourself. That is your only way to protect your family members. Do not eat together. Don't think that you're keeping a distance and you're eating together. No. As long as you're facing each other, don't face each other and eat. The rule, for example, in China, you can sit on a bench and eat facing the same direction. So one person is sitting here, another one is here, another one is there, another one is here, but all of them are facing the same direction. They're not facing each other. They're not face to face. Because the probability of your transferring infection to the opposite person is highest when you're face to face and highest when you're without a mask. If one person is wearing a mask and the other person is not wearing a mask, then the probability of your transmitting the infection to each other is about 18%. And if you're wearing a cloth mask, especially if you're interacting with the patient, you may need to have more than a cloth mask because the porosity of the cloth material may vary depending on the quality of cloth that we use. So therefore, make sure you're wearing a good mask if you're interacting with the patient. I have survived my 1.5 years of corona existence. I have not missed a single day in the hospital. And I have carried children who are COVID positive in my hands without a PPE, without gloves, but making sure that I don't have their face onto my face. Some of them, of course, coughed, but I made sure I had my mask on. That's the best protection. Your probability of getting the infection from objects that you have touched. Say, for example, I'm touching this and somebody else touches it. A cell phone that you're holding on your tight and pass it on to other kaan pe lagaya. Now, that may not be very wise because you will have the air droplets here and you will have the viruses on this, and you'll give it. So put it on speakerphone and let the people listen. And don't have it putting onto your ear and your mouth. No. And better सुनने के लिए invariably mask नीचे करके सुनते हैं. Best way to transmit an infection. The fomites, as fomites is something which you touch and somebody else touches and gets the infection. Normally, though there was a lot of hype and fear in the early phases, the probability is a little low, and that's lower in the probability factor now. However, as far as possible, if you're using a lift, make sure you sanitize your finger with which you touch. What do? I try to not to use a lift. Lift is a closed space. And if you're traveling with somebody in a lift who may be infected, there is a problem. It's healthier to climb stairs. I use the end of a key tip to use a lift button, a switch. I use a key tip, and I at the end of it sanitize the key. That's what I do. That's how I've survived in the hospital without getting infected. Similarly, making sure that whatever you do, you try to keep a distance of at least 6 feet between patients, between persons that are likely to be contaminated or infected. So you need to take these precautions to prevent the infection. That's all that you have. So your peak probability of infection, as I said, is from the day of your symptom, first symptom, plus minus 2, which is 5 days of infectivity. They did a study looking at the viruses within the throat and the nose of patients of coronavirus from the day of their first symptom. And what did they find? After 9 days, they could not culture a single person with a living virus, which means after 9 days, the probability of you infecting somebody else is very low, very low. What does that mean? Your probability of infecting being low means you're not excreting living virus. But then you tested positive after 2 weeks also. Yes, because the RT-PCR tests for the RNA of the virus, which may be dead or living. Both are possible. So a dead virus can test positive on your RT-PCR test. Don't be alarmed by that. There are patients that come, bring a doctor ji, pata nahi kya kare, mera kya hoga, मेरा तो 1.5 महीना हो गया, आज भी टेस्ट पॉजिटिव आया है, आज भी टेस्ट पॉजिटिव 2 महीने हो गए. Oh, it's possible because in some people, those that have very poor ciliary function are special motility structures in the lining of their windpipes which expel viruses and bacteria from your airway passages. And this is deficient or damaged in smokers, deficient or damaged in asthmatics, deficient or damaged in chronic bronchitic patients, in chronic obstructive airway disease, and patients who have constantly need to be given medication for recurrent respiratory infections. So in these patients, the virus may not be expelled in the reasonable time that you expect for a normal human being, and therefore you may test positive for a longer period. Don't worry about that. It doesn't mean that you're infective, doesn't mean that you're going to have a dangerous turn. No. But once the first symptom comes, in 80%, as I said, you become all right. In the 15 to 20%, what happens? The disease takes what is known as the dangerous turn. And this is what you need to recognize if you want to prevent a serious turn to your disease. So that prevention is by recognizing the dangerous turn. And how do you recognize the dangerous turn? Usually, after 1 or 2 days of trial, they don't have sore throat, they may still have a little cough, or they may still have a low 99-degree fever or a 98.4 normal temperature. When they have that, 4th day, they're very happy. Sir, ab to theek ho gaya. I'm all right now. But on the 5th or the 6th day, suddenly a spike of temperature, 101, 100. Doctor, mera to 102 aa gaya aaj. Oh, that's a dangerous turn, especially if it is on the 6th day. There are people say, sir, kal tak to 99 tha, aaj pata nahi kaise 101 ho gaya, 101 degrees. So a sudden increase in temperature and a sudden change in temperature pattern from low grade to high grade or from normal to high grade fever is one of the earliest indicators that the disease is taking a dangerous turn. One of the earliest indicators. Once you understand this is the most common symptom, then you watch out. Invariably, they'll say, "Sir, ek खांसी आती है, कुछ निकलता नहीं है, nothing comes out." Or they'll say, "Sir, एक congestion और एक घुटन सी हो रही है कुछ." So, three key symptoms of this, the most important and the key symptom is fever. High grade fever on the 5th, 6th day, or a fever pattern that goes from the moderate to the high grade on the 5th, 6th day. In the earlier phase of the disease, this was usually seen on the 7th day. But in this phase of the disease, we are seeing it on the 5th day. So now we know that this is because of the dangerous turn. So how does the behavior of the virus change on the 5th, 6th day? In the 20%, in the 80%, nothing happens. They're fine. They're happily going home, or at home. But in the 15 to 20%, something else happens. Then what is it? And once you understand the pathomechanics and how it evolves, things are very simple. In the 15 to 20%, these are people who suddenly have this sudden fever and cough and congestion. So the early on days, in the early phase of March, April, May of last year, in the hospitals where these patients were being admitted, they would get X-ray chest done, they would get CT scan done, and it looked like pneumonia. So they started getting antibiotics. So the background of giving antibiotics was based on the assumption that they're now probably having viral and bacterial pneumonia. So they were given doxycycline, azithromycin, which are excellent antibiotics for controlling especially secondary bacterial pneumonia. So all these patients were being given that. They were being given these antibiotics. They make a difference. In Italy, case after case after case, they would come, get admitted, need oxygen, go on a ventilator, and die. Within a week, most of them were dead. Ventilator did not help. One smart pathologist tried to investigate why is it that these patients are not responding to ventilators. That person was a pathologist. He did a post-mortem. Okay, the post-mortem, remember, one of the first dissection of a dead body was done in Italy, way back in the 18th century, when somebody dissected the body to look into the body. In this particular case, this pathologist did an autopsy, post-mortem, checked for the lungs under the microscope. What did he find? He was surprised. There was no evidence of pneumonia. What he saw was shocking. What he saw was blood vessels in the lungs, all with clotted blood. Normally, blood doesn't clot inside your blood vessels. You could make out under a microscope whether it is an ante-mortem clot or a post-mortem. None of the capillaries, none of the blood vessels were patent. They were all blocked with clots. That is when this pathologist realized we're not dealing with a pneumonia, we're dealing with a coagulation anomaly where blood clots within the blood vessels of the lungs. And if blood clots within the blood vessels of the lungs, then huge problem. The normal exchange of oxygen between the air and the blood within the alveoli of your lungs happens in the lungs, and that is based on the flow of blood in these blood. If the flow is blocked by clotting of blood, then no oxygenation can happen. So even if you give oxygen, oxygenation cannot happen. That is the problem. So you need to look at what percentage of lung is damaged, and hope that the residual part of the lung that is not damaged will carry the air and the oxygenation will happen there. Here is what was to be understood. Why is blood clotting in these lungs? And the picture which looked like pneumonia did happen in patients that died after 6-7 days of their admission. If they died, they had a pneumonia type of picture. And this picture was seen after bacterial infection, because the bacteria that were there in the lungs as normal flora of your lungs, they started getting infecting and causing infective and causing pneumonia. So this is what caused the bacterial pneumonia. But before this, there was no bacterial pneumonia. It happens only on the 5th, 6th day of your dangerous turn in the disease. So why was the dangerous turn happening? So in the 15 to 20%, the dangerous turn happened because of what was later on found to be a cytokine storm autoantibody related problem, which means normally what do the antibodies do? On the first day of your symptom, it is a fight between antibodies and antigen that creates release of inflammatory chemicals within the blood, causing fever, causing symptoms. But once the job of eliminating the virus, which the virus is eliminated in very efficiently by the antibodies in most of the cases. Once the virus is eliminated, then the antibodies are still there. So that in case there is a future virus entering, you can protect yourself by using those same antibodies. Now, these antibodies, unfortunately, have a problem. These are designed to recognize the virus based on a virus structural uniqueness. And what is the structural uniqueness? What you see in the pictures on TV. What looks like a nice, beautiful toy, red spikes with flowery thing, which looks pretty, but it's a dangerous thing. It is the virus core with the spike protein all around it. This spike protein is also a similar structure is also present in the blood vessels of the lungs. So these antibodies, which are trained to recognize these spike proteins and identify the virus by looking at the spike proteins, attack the viruses and kill them. But they also attack the cells in the lungs which have similar spike proteins and cause what is called as the autoantibody reaction. And this autoantibody reaction then causes clotting of blood within that. So the dangerous turn is not because of the virus at all. The virus is eliminated by the body's antibodies. The dangerous turn is because the body's own immune system attacking its own cells within the lungs and within the blood vessels within the lungs. Therefore, this is an autoantibody reaction. So how do you treat autoantibody reaction? How do you treat conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, गठिया जिसको बोलते हैं, conditions like Crohn's disease or loose motions, which is genetically determined, asthmatic patients. So these are conditions, systemic lupus erythematosus. These are several conditions which are autoantibody, where body immune system fights its own cells and damages it, causing, depending on the damage, maybe it is the kidney causing kidney failure and systemic lupus erythematosus, or arthritis in the cell, the antibodies attacking the synovial lining of the joints, or any other organ system that is being damaged by autoantibodies. So these autoantibodies, therefore, are critical in our understanding of disease pathology of coronavirus dangerous turn. So how do you deal with this? What do you do with intractable asthma? You give steroids. What do you do with intractable Crohn's disease? You give steroids. What do you do with intractable systemic lupus erythematosus? You give steroids. Steroids help suppress the autoantibody reaction. That's what it does. So steroid is an essential drug. But steroid alone will not work. So the analogy for this that I say is the analogy of a thundercloud that is coming and gathering in the sky. You carry an umbrella, but you don't open the umbrella. You carry it in your bag. You have the umbrella, but you don't open it. But when the showers come, you then open the umbrella, protect yourself from the rain by having the umbrella there opened out. But if the shower is strong, you will still have the umbrella open, but your pant and sari and shoes and all will get wet. Okay. And on the other hand, if there is a thunderstorm, your umbrella, you will immediately close, put it in your pocket and go to seek shelter. That is precisely what you do when the cytokine shower is there, you give the steroid cover. You're okay, you may be happy. You will recover from the illness. But when the shower is strong, your umbrella of steroid cover alone does not work. You need to have additional protection. And what is the protection? Exactly in a heavy rainfall, you wear special boots and special covers which protect your pants from the shoe opponents. Similarly, you need to supplement steroids with anticoagulants. So giving anticoagulants along with steroids suppresses the antibody reaction, which is damaging body's own cells, and also prevents clotting of blood within the blood vessels, and therefore prevents the dangerous turn in the disease. Prevents clotting, prevents pneumonia-like picture, prevents secondary bacterial infection, and it is all a great control of the disease. So your early timeline-based recognition of the disease and starting of steroids at the right time, not early time, at the right time on the 5th day from the first symptom and starting anticoagulants together works beautifully in controlling and preventing a worsening storm, a worsening disease process. Once you understand this, then things fall into place. So what do? Up to the 5th day from the first symptom, you just take rest. You may take supplements or vitamins to improve your boost your immunity. That is vitamin B, C, and D, Bombay, Chennai, Delhi. Vitamin B, C, and D. You may take these, supplement with good food and rest. 80% become all right and nothing goes wrong. 15 to 20% have a dangerous turn. So by 4th day from the first symptom, you stop taking Calpol. Do not take Calpol. Do not take paracetamol from the 4th day onwards. We want to know, without paracetamol, how bad is your fever. Therefore, you will miss a fever. Many people say, sir, bukhar nahi tha. I only had body ache. I was taking paracetamol for body ache. Yes. So don't take paracetamol even for body ache on the 4th and the 5th day. Because if the disease is taking a dangerous turn, you will immediately recognize it. And from there, you can take on the disease very well by starting steroids and anticoagulants. That is why the timeline becomes important. So no paracetamol on the 4th and the 5th day. If you have 101, 102 fever on that 4th and the 5th day, please start your steroids and anticoagulants. And a lot of people think aspirin works. No, aspirin doesn't work because the disease itself causes a thrombocytopenia, which means the low platelet count. So despite a thrombocytopenia, there is still a thrombotic tendency, which means despite the platelet count being low, there is still a tendency for the blood to clot within the blood vessels. Your job is to prevent that clotting, and it's preventing that clotting which protects your lung. It is protection of your lungs from clotting that protects you from the dangerous consequence of the disease. Therefore, timeline-based management is critical, understandable, and is life-saving. So you need to look at it from that perspective. So a small group of people, they cross the 5th day, they have start fever again, you started antibiotics and not azithromycin and doxycycline now because they won't work. Because far too many people around the country have received azithromycin and doxycycline, and there'll be far too many bacteria that are resistant to these two bugs, these two antibiotics, and therefore giving them will not work. You may have to give other antibiotics in consultation with your doctor, starting from the 4th or the 5th day from the dangerous turn in the disease. The further dangerous turn will be seen if your lung continues to be damaged. If your lung continues to be damaged afterwards, then by around 7-8 days, you are stable. You manage with a little oxygen. Maybe you needed to be in the hospital. You needed 2-3 liters of oxygen. Suddenly your oxygen requirement jump. Your oxygen requirement may jump from 1 or 2 liters to 5 liters. That is telling you that there is continued damage in the lung. You may need a bolus dose of steroids in consultation with your doctor. And it is also possible that you will need to have an infusion of anticoagulants to be started at this stage if your symptoms are not settled. So the ones that worsen are usually 10 days after the first symptom and 5 days from the dangerous turn in the disease. And these people go in for requirement of oxygen from 1 to 2 liters to 5 liters to 15 liters to 40 liters to 60 liters. Beyond that, you need to give special equipment, BiPAP or CPAP. As far as possible, you need to have the patient avoided from going onto a ventilator. Why? Because it has been found that the outcome of giving the patient a ventilatory support is not conducive to a long-term survival. Most patients that went on ventilator in Italy and New York died. And they were appalled at the way these patients were dying. So then the concept of non-invasive ventilation, without putting a tube into your windpipe, you ventilate the patient by giving oxygen as far as possible, high flow, maybe 15 liters given by non-rebreathing mask, or 40 to 60 liters based on high flow nasal. This is what you do in such a situation. And then push comes to shove. If nothing works, then you have to give ventilatory support. And then there's the next level which comes up. Even with ventilatory support, you are not able to manage oxygen. Then what do? You do what is known as extracorporeal membrane oxygenators. What is corpus? Corpus means a body. Extracorporeal means outside the body. Outside the body, membrane oxygenator. So this is like an artificial kidney you have for dialysis. It's an artificial lung for oxygenating the blood within the lungs. So take blood from a vein. So there are veno-venous ECMOs and a veno-arterial ECMOs. So you have two different types of ECMOs. Each have different indications. We use these ECMOs in very, very terminal cases. So you will see that patients have been put on ECMO, but the survival chances are pretty low. Horrendously expensive, very expensive piece of equipment, difficult to maintain, and the numbers of staff that are skilled to use it is also still lower. So this is what is the end stage. And subsequently, the patient succumbs. Or if you're lucky, some recovery pattern happens and you're all right. But there is one caution. And the caution is, a lot of people have a digital sensor and they keep sitting at home waiting for the oxygen to drop to a moderate or a severe level. And what is that? It's below 93 degrees. Now, how did this concept come about? Because they felt that this is a stage at which you need ventilator. If you don't need ventilator and you can get oxygen supply at home, you stay at home with oxygen supply. Fair enough, it was okay when you did not understand the pathology of the disease. Now that you know the pathology of the disease, you have to understand that this pathology is because of lung damage. In a normal human being, 2/3 of your lung is spare capacity. Why did God design us like that? That is because the spare capacity is built in for running, for climbing, for escaping from dangerous situations. So that extra energy is required by the body, delivered by burning more glucose, using oxygen, which is supplied by the blood. So this extra oxygenation comes from the extra recruitment of the air passages, air cells within the lung. So 2/3 is spare capacity. So if you're waiting for your oxygen saturation to drop to 93%, you're waiting for your lung to be dangerously reduced in their capacity to oxygenate by almost 60 to 70%. As far as possible, try to identify the dangerous turn in the disease, start an early management of the dangerous turn, and then seek help under guidance only, not without guidance. The guidance is with the medical oversight. You take care of the problems of sugar, which happens with steroid intake. Sugar control goes haywire. Number two problem the um, with the steroid is that it disturbs your salt and water balance in your body. So patients with kidney disease, patients with hypertension have a problem in their fluid and electrolyte balance, salt balance. And they go into failures, heart failures, and all kinds of things. Therefore, steroids should always be taken under medical supervision, not without. Similarly, the anticoagulants can worsen bleeding in the intestine in people with ulcers, patients with the bleeding piles can have bleeding from the bleeding piles happening. Patients who have running nose with the bleeding tendency in the nose can bleed from the nose. So you have to be very careful. So these drugs have to be taken very carefully under supervision, not without supervision. So do not self-medicate in the use of these drugs. But once you understand the timing, you can prevent a dangerous turn and you can prevent the patient from going from bad to worse. So this is what you recognize this and then manage. So that is one part. There is another category of patients who after 4 weeks or so start developing palpitations. The heart, sir, वो दिल की धड़कन ऐसे चिड़िया की तरह फड़क रही थी. Palpitations. Some of them say, डॉक्टर साहब हमारा हार्ट रेट तो बिल्कुल 40 हो गया. Yes, both are possible. Increase in heart rate or decrease in heart rate, both are possible. And that usually happens in the 4th to the 6th week. So this pattern is seen in a small number, but it is there. So there is a thrombotic tendency which lasts about 3 to 4 weeks, which means the clotting tendency lasts for a long period. The steroids are given only for a week or 10 days, but the anticoagulants are given for 3 to 4 weeks. That is because in many patients, the thrombotic tendency, the clotting tendency of blood within the capillaries remains for 3 to 4 weeks. The other corollary is because there is a tendency for thrombosis, you have to remember not to do vigorous exercises to prevent a sudden cardiac attack. Sudden attack. So we know patients who suddenly collapsed and died. On the 4th week, घर पहुंच गया था. After being in the hospital and in the ICU, they have gone home, reached home happily, celebrating their new given second birth. They're doing a treadmill to get back into action very soon. But no, don't overdo your exercises vigorously for at least 2 months. Long COVID. So long COVID patients are sometimes have low-grade fever, sometimes have persistent cough, sometimes a persistent breathlessness, sometimes a persistent tiredness. Now, tiredness can be because of body aches, but it can also be because of the lungs having been damaged significantly, and therefore the breathlessness comes because lungs can't kick in to meet the extra demand for oxygen. So this is what you have to understand. So the extra demand has to be filled in by extra breathing that is required. Breathlessness. You need to understand this, and therefore, if there is persistent breathlessness beyond 4 weeks, you may need to get in touch with your pulmonologist and maybe need drugs to prevent fibrosis in the lungs, to prevent damage to the lungs, and therefore should be continued on supervision, should be continued on significant exercises to keep your lung capacity good. And the simplest thing I tell is, gubare kharid lo and keep blowing balloons, 5 balloons every 2 hours. With one blow, inflate the balloon as much as possible. So that is what you have to do. 2 hourly chest physiotherapy to keep your lungs inflated in good tone. That is what you do. You may need to take medicines. That will be in consultation with the chest physician who will guide you if you're developing damage from long COVID and you need to take special medicines for that. So that is what we guide most people on. Now coming to the mucormycosis. I don't like the expression black fungus because black fungus means it goes with the derogatory term of black being bad. Okay, so we do not want people to have negative connotation with the color. Therefore, you use the term mucormycosis. Mucormycosis is a fungus which is present all around us. It is present in the air, it is present in the soil, present in vegetation, present all around. People say, where does it come from? It is there all around. But normally it doesn't cause a problem. It causes a problem only when your immunity is low by steroids. And on top of that, you have taken antibiotics, which eliminates the normal bacterial flora, which keeps the fungus from growing and multiplying. And also by the fact that the virus itself could be contributing to lowered immunity. So this is what you have to understand. The lowered immunity because of the virus, lowered immunity because of the steroids, and unnecessary excessive long steroid or starting steroids too early in time can contribute to this. And on top of that, patients who are on diabetic medicines and the diabetic control is not good, they are also more vulnerable than others. Why? Because the fungus needs 4 things. It needs warmth, it needs moisture, it needs starch or glucose, and it needs one more thing, which is an acidic pH. If you have an acidic pH, the virus can multiply beautifully. So diabetic ketoacidotic patients have acidic pH in their mucosa, and in the mucosa, because this immunity is suppressed, because the bacteria are eliminated, the normal commensal bacteria eliminated, the field is laid open for the virus, the fungus to grow and thrive. And it thrives in the moist areas of your sinuses, and also it could grow in your lungs. To start with, the fungus is white. As it matures, it starts throwing spores which are black. That's why the black fungus term. So this needs to be recognized early, and that recognition is by doing a nasal swab, and testing under a microscope after treating with potassium hydroxide. Okay, it's a chemical that you use to dissolve the mucous cell lining, and then use that to check under microscope. Even in district hospital, you can diagnose it by just examining the hyphae of the fungi. This fungi can be identified and treated well. Only thing is, if you're delayed, then the fungus erodes through the floor of the eyeball and the eyeball starts swelling. So you have to catch it before that. How do you catch it? A blocked nose after 10 days of the first symptom. A swelling on one side of the face after 10 days or after having gone home. One side nasal blockage with discharge which is black or brown in color from one side. All these are clues, or a one-sided headache. All these are clues, or a deep headache. All these are clues to a fungal infection. Go to an ENT surgeon, get yourself checked, and then see what happens. If the test shows positive fungal hyphae, then you know you need to be in the hospital, you need to be on treatment, using liposomal amphotericin B, which is the best drug for this, and giving this can be life-saving. In addition, please remember these fungi can erode through the veins. Clotting in the veins can be produced by them, and it can erode into your brain, the veins, through the veins, and cause clotting in the brain venous channels, cavernous sinus thrombosis. And this clotting is what causes damage to the areas around the eye, causing blurring of vision. So blurring of vision, bulging of eyes, swelling in the eye, and a neurosurgical involvement by that, all these are late things. To prevent these late damages by early recognition, by one side nasal blockage, one side discharge, black or brownish colored discharge, one side swelling, one side headache, deep headache. Do not wait for the symptoms to worsen till the eye starts swelling or there is blurring of vision, then it is a bad thing. Identifying early, recognizing early, and treating early is very useful. It works beautifully. So you need to understand this part of management, and that is what will help you manage and prevent the complications. So this, in a nutshell, is what we have on the disease and the complications thereof. The vaccination is a different ball game. As of today, the only way to prevent any disease which is started by a virus is a vaccine campaign. There is no medicine for any viral illness because viruses become part of our human cells. To kill the virus, you have to kill that cell, and that is not possible. Ghar phooke tamasha nahi dekha jata. You can't kill your cells and then say that you'll stay alive and kicking. It doesn't work like that. You can't kill your critical cells in your body to kill the virus. So therefore, you have to vaccinate. So looking at the picture of vaccines that are available, at the moment there are only 2 available. Third one is likely to be available soon, which is Sputnik. Covishield is a non-replicating chimpanzee adenovirus protein spike based vaccine. What does that mean? The unique ID of the virus is this protein spike. Using this as an ID target for creating a virus, they used the carrier virus of a common cold virus in a chimpanzee and used it to produce the vaccine, which is the Covishield vaccine of AstraZeneca. Has a small tendency to produce clots, but other than that, it is reasonably safe. Whereas we are small, 1 in 100,000 possibility. Whereas the disease virus infection causes mortality in less than 1%, 1 in 100, less than 1 in 100. So that's a high number compared to 1 in 100,000. The safety profile of a vaccine has to be several times that of the safety profile of that of a virus, of a drug. Why? Because drugs are given to people that are ill. Vaccines are given to people that are normal. Therefore, the whole concept of vaccine safety has to be higher, is well entrenched among all researchers, and most vaccines are reasonably safe. You can go ahead and take the vaccine. Covaxin is a killed virus vaccine with all the components there, and it stimulates about 80% protection. The AstraZeneca provides about 70% protection. You may need to redo the vaccine, and the interval is now by recommendation 8 to 12 weeks, going up to 16 weeks also. But the recommendation which came up has been 8 to 12 weeks internationally. So this is what you have to understand. We give this vaccine as a protection. But does the vaccine give you complete protection? No. There may be variants. There may not be as vulnerable to the vaccine. Therefore, you need to continue to use this mask. You need to continue to use the sanitizer, or even a soap and water is better. If you leave the sanitizer in a car, because of the heat in a closed space of the car, the alcohol will evaporate, leaving only the water or the jelly, which is absolutely useless. So you need to make sure that it is not left in a hot environment where the alcohol can evaporate away. So soap is far better there. So for prevention, best is your mask, your distancing, your isolation and quarantining, and your sanitizing and soap and water. The next is your vaccine. How long will it protect? At the moment, we can say definitely it's 5 to 6 months. Beyond that, we'll have to wait and see because the vaccines have been only created only now. They have not had the time to test them for a long period. So therefore, we will keep watching what's happening. We'll studying and researching to know what is happening. So that is the story of the vaccine. The other virus vaccines that are there
Excuse me, sir.
are the RNA
I'm
virus.
so sorry to interrupt
I'm
you.
just finishing. I'm just
Yeah.
finishing. Last
Yes, sir.
sentence.
Yes. Thank you.
The
Thank
other
you, sir.
virus vaccines are the RNA vaccines, which are synthetic RNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, and they are not available here as yet. Otherwise, we only have these two virus vaccines for protection. So those are the ways you can protect and prevent. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. So let's start with the Q&A session. First, I will take the questions from the chat box and then we will ask the live audience. So the first question is, kindly tell what is the possibility of babies under 5 years getting coronavirus?
What is the possibility? Yes, there is a possibility. I have seen my own patients who came to me for deformity correction for clubfoot, who was 3-year-old, had corona. I examined the child, readied for surgery, tested, was positive. So was in quarantine. Another baby, 1-year-old child, was in the ICU with the virus. So it is there. The numbers are much less than adult population, but the probability and the possibility is there and they can be infected. But the other part of the story, that the next strain which will come in the next wave is going to be mainly children. No, that doesn't gel. There is no evidence for that. You can hypothesize that most of the people infected were adults. Most of the people vaccinated are adults. Therefore, the left behind numbers are children, and therefore you may have higher number of children infection. But not because the virus is targeting children, no.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is it possible to get infection from grocery items? If yes, how can we prevent it?
Through
Grocery items.
grocery items. Earlier, there was a lot of hype and fear on that, but the current evidence is fomites. Fomites are things that you handle. Okay, cell phones, books, keyboards, public switches, public door handles, railings of staircases, railings in metros. You see, commonly held handles in bus stands. These are common public space objects which people touch. Those thought that you get infected from them, but it hasn't really borne out. However, if you've touched any strange object, please wash them. Grocery items, washable items, wash it with just water. And running water is good enough. Warm water is still better. That's all that is required. Items that you eat after cooking, cooking takes care of the virus. Items that you eat raw, for example, salad, wash it thoroughly with running water. Nothing else. Things like cucumber and all, you can wash it even with your liquid detergents that you have and wash it nicely with running water and use it. There's no issues. And the others, most of the items we cook and eat, heat destroys the virus in no time. No problem.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is, it's been 3 months I recovered from COVID, but I have had cough and throat congestions very frequently since then. How long will it persist?
Yeah. This is long COVID, and the long COVID could be because you had a significant lung involvement, and that is causing cough and difficulty in your breathing. So you need to be in touch with the pulmonologist to see, have you had a long-term permanent damage? And what is that? A certain number of people whose lung involvement was in the severe category on CT scan. What is the severe category? Anywhere from 19 to 25 out of 25 scores will be a severe category. These are patients who develop fibrosis in their lungs, which reduces the compliance of their lungs to expand and contract. Expansion and contraction are necessary for normal breathing, for normal oxygen exchange between blood and air cells in the lung. Therefore, you have to get yourself checked by a pulmonologist, maybe a repeat CT scan, because that cough would be because of a persistent lung damage, permanent damage.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, Uma ma'am will ask a question.
Good evening, sir. My gratitude. Thanks for
Good
such an
evening.
enlightening session. Sir, generally, what we see is when COVID is on peak, we start taking vitamin C and zinc and other multivitamins. But the moment it lowers down, we just ignore that. Can you please tell how long we should continue and what should be the tendency of taking this multivitamins and vitamin C? Yeah.
Practically, did God design us to have vitamins and tablets and pills? Otherwise these vitamin pills would be growing on trees, no? Nature didn't design us for that. Nature designed us to have a variety of food items from which we get a variety of minerals, variety of vitamins, variety of stuff. So a balanced diet a person is having, and a good balanced diet is all that is required for good immunity. We do not need to take vitamins and pills. No, not necessary at all. However, because of the way we have manufactured cravings in human beings for junk food, we have manufactured cravings in human beings for abnormal fetishes for food items, where they select one type of food, do not have other type. So there is not a diversity of food items which gives you a diversity of vitamins and minerals to boost your immunity. You therefore may need to supplement vitamins. It is only an immune booster. If you have a balanced diet, if you promise to have a balanced diet, nothing is required. Nothing is required. Now, zinc is a different ball game, which came up in popularity initially. Suddenly, no zinc, no zinc, no iron, no iron. You know why? Because zinc and iron are two minerals required by the fungi to grow rapidly. So once the epidemic of what my friend said, viral ho gaya, ye fungal ho gaya. The fungal epidemic came up, then you reduce the zinc and the iron to reduce the growth potential for the fungi. Nothing else.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Rajesh sir is asking a question. What precautions should be taken by a person who is suffering from thyroid and is overweight to protect from corona?
Yeah. I have had patients whom I have guided through. Since my concept on this coronavirus evolved in August, I wrote a paper in August, redrafted it in September, redrafted in November, tried sharing it, people, nobody accepted it. Nobody accepted it. But people knew that I'm doing it. So many of my friends and people that knew me, they kept in touch with me. And the people that knew me had BMIs of 35, 40. You know, BMI of 35, 40, their weight would be 140 kilograms. 140 kilograms. Smokers, diabetics, whom I have guided through without even a single breath of oxygen extra. Just by looking at timelines and starting them on medication by timelines. Nothing was required. So, if you have diabetes, if you have body weight, you just make sure you're strict about your timelines. Identify and recognize your dangerous turn and start immediate treatment, you'll be fine. But can I say that you will be fine 100% of the time? No. There is about 3-4% of people from within those 15%, So if those 15%, if there are 100 of those 15% of people, about 3-4 would be one where I cannot control. Even with that, for some reason, genetic environment or whatever, they still have a continued massive cytokine storm, and they will have myocarditis. I've lost 2 of my very close friends. I couldn't save them because they had cardiac problems, which can happen and you can do nothing about it. You can recognize it early. You may give some medications for it. Can you treat it or can you medicate for it? The chances are you may treat it, yes, but will you be successful? We don't know. So don't worry, even if your BMI is high, even if you're overweight, even if you're obese, don't worry. Look at the timeline, you can be fine.
Thank you so much, sir. Now Ruby ma'am will ask a question.
Thank you so much, sir, for the valuable information you have given. My first question is that you said that there is a possibility that babies under 5 years can get the disease. So babies under 5 years usually do not wear mask that religiously. I mean, that sincerely they cannot wear mask. So what can we do to protect them?
You wear the mask. If you remember, I said that the probability of your getting infected if both are wearing mask is very low. But if one is not wearing the mask, it is 17 or 18%. You're reducing it by at least, if your students score 80%, don't you say that's good?
Of course.
This is 82% lower probability. You wear a mask, you do the hygiene. The child, you can cover not with a mask, but with even a simple dupatta. Why not?
Sir, there is another question because every day in news we hear that there is a Delta Plus variant and there are new variants coming in. So to what extent vaccine can protect us from these variants?
Look, the vaccine has identified spike protein in AstraZeneca. Covaxin has identified dead virus different components, not just spike protein. Your mRNA synthetic viral vaccines of COVID, of Pfizer and Moderna have looked at other components. So these are things which have been identified. So if the spike protein has had a mutation, then AstraZeneca will not be as effective. But to have a spike protein mutation which completely drastically changes the shape of the spike protein is unlikely, isn't it? A nose may be broad, it may be long, it may be hooked, it may be beaked. I'm talking about a human being. So you may have a mutation with a very broad nose among the Africans, a very sharp nose among the Iranians, a hooked nose or big nose among the Afghanians. I'm talking about actual racial tendencies. So these are genetically there, but they all look like the nose, don't they? So a spike protein mutation may still look like the spike protein to a large extent, but minor variations may be there. So the AstraZeneca may not be 100% effective. Anyway, they don't claim that, but it is still effective to 40% or 50%. So the probability of a variant being completely ineffective is, but theoretically possible. Therefore, we will have to wait and see. A Delta Plus variant, the Delta Plus variant was to come up. So Delta Plus variant I've been hearing about for the last 2 weeks. If you see the Delta variant, when it came up, within 2 weeks, the graph was really spiking high. It was really spiking high. And I know when I talk to people, they understood that this is something which you need to understand. Just a minute. We need to understand the Delta variant, the way it went up and the way it will come down is identical. So it went up very fast. So if the Delta Plus was more contagious than the Delta variant, then it would have spread by now in a rapid way. It hasn't. The number of cases are only coming down every day, isn't it? So therefore, you don't look at it from that scaremongering, if I were to say it. I would say I would look at it only in terms of looking at how we can protect the people by continued masking. So if you were to see this graph, can you see the graph?
Could
That
you hold it a
steep,
little backwards? Could you hold it a little backwards?
can you see
Yeah.
it?
Yes, sir.
That sharp spike is the way the virus went up because of the Delta variant. If the Delta plus was more effective, this curve would have been, those of you in the science background who understand graphs will understand, it would have been really spiky, 90-degree gradient. It is not. So don't worry. And majority of people that carry the infection from one person to other have had the infection by now. Maybe not complete herd immunity, but a reasonable level of immunity to protect a reasonable number of people from getting infection. So don't get totally hyped. Maybe 6 months down the line, there will be a smaller wave, but not as big a wave. Why? Because a large number of have had the infection, a large number would have been vaccinated by then, they would be protected. And where would children get the infection from? From adults. So if adults are protected, children are also protected. So let's not get into this.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. It is so relieving now.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Will you be allowed? Myself, Professor Anup Ghosh. Sir, you have mentioned that bubbling of balloons that creates the lungs expansion. We have a very old system of conch. Playing of conch also do the same thing, which is very ancient practice in some of the areas of India. So, can you suggest that playing of conch is a better way if you practice every day? That will make a benefit because it expand lungs.
Yeah. So it is basically deep breathing,
Yeah,
inhalation and exhalation.
right.
So if you have access to conch, go ahead, do it. If you have access to balloons, go ahead, do it. If you have access, if you are a sports person, football bladders, play them. If you don't have access to any of these, just take deep breaths. Pranayam. Why not pranayam? You do that as a breathing exercise. It works beautifully. And playing a flute, the mouth organ, any of those wind-based musical instruments which you play with your mouth. You can use any of those. So whatever you do, you need to make sure you inhale deeply and exhale deeply. That's all. All are equally effective. I wouldn't say one is more effective than the other.
Right,
All are
sir.
equal. But when you go to a doctor, he'll ask you to buy a 1200 rupee inspirational spirometer. That is why I say balloons, nothing else. I don't want them to spend 1200 rupees on their inspirational spirometer.
Right.
Conch is as good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. The last question is from Tinu ma'am. What will be the possible symptoms which can be seen in kids affected with coronavirus, as kids below 4 can't tell much what they are feeling or what they are going through? And is it feasible to check their oxygen level with oximeter?
I am not recommending oxygen checking by anyone. Don't do it. If your oxygen level is to be checked and it is dropping, you miss the whole point of looking at timelines. Timelines, why did I think of timelines? Why did I think of not using the digital sensor? Because the digital sensor initially used to cost 5,000 rupees. My slum dwelling patient cannot afford to buy a 5,000 rupee digital sensor. Now the cost has come down. They cannot afford that. How will they check at home what is happening? And even if you check at home, what are you checking? You're waiting for your lung to be damaged 2/3 before it starts dropping from 98 to 97 to 96 to 94, 93. So 93% saturation level, where your ICMR protocol says is a moderate to severe category, to go to the hospital, too late. Your lungs are gone at that level. You don't want to check your child's saturation to reach that level. No. Children, if they are unwell, you will get to know immediately. Because children cannot express their feelings. So neonates and less than 2-year-old who cannot speak well, who cannot vocalize the symptoms, what happens when the child is sleepy? Those of you who dealt with kids would know. I deal with kids every day. Today also I saw about 60 kids in my outpatient. 60 kids I saw. Okay. What happens when the child is sleepy? The child is cranky, crying. Why? Because the child doesn't know what is happening. He is drowsy, he or she is drowsy, but doesn't know whether should stay awake, interact with the mother, play, but something is keeping the child going down and is wanting to stay awake, and therefore child is cranky and crying. So the mother will tell you, Doctor Sahab, isko neend aa rahi hai isliye ro raha hai. The mother will tell you, Doctor Sahab, isko bhook lagi hai tabhi ro raha hai. The mother knows best. If the child is unwell, need not have fever, need not have a digital sensor for oxygen saturation. अगर ऑक्सीजन सैचुरेशन जानने वाली हालत हो ना, बच्चे के साथ पता, children have a respiratory rate which is already twice that of adults. So in children, for the respiratory rate to go up, it will go above 40 to be pathological. वो पहले से दिख जाएगा आपको, दूर से पता चल जाएगा सांस फूल रहा है इसका. डॉक्टर साहब इसका तो दम घुट रहा है, सांस फूल रहा है. If a breastfeeding mother will tell you, बच्चे को बुखार हो रहा है डॉक्टर साहब. The moment the child is put to the breast, the mother will tell you child is having fever. You don't need a thermometer. The mother is the best thermometer for the child. So you can make out. The mother is the best index for the ill health of the child. Will not take feeds. नाक बंद होगा तो बच्चा दूध नहीं पिएगा बोतल से, क्योंकि नाक बंद है तो मुंह बंद करके आप ले नहीं सकते हो. A child with a blocked nose cannot feed with a bottle, because to feed with a bottle you need to suck. To suck, you need to have air going through your nose. You can't suck otherwise. So the mother is the best physician for the child. The mother will tell you, and doctors and pediatricians are trained to recognize that. Respect the mother's recognition of a child not looking well, not feeling well, not doing well.
Thank you so much, sir. I know we all wish for this event to go on, but it is definitely very helpful. But every good thing has an end, and so does this session. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude towards Dr. Matthew for being here with us today. Thank you, sir, for such a knowledgeable session. I'm sure we all got to learn something and we had a value addition in our lives today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We'll definitely see you all in our next session tomorrow, conducted by Ishik Khosla, founder of Celiac Society India, on the topic Diet Plans for COVID recovered patients along with other immunity boosting diet plans. Till then, stay healthy and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you so much.